So we have with us today former U.S. Ambassador to United Nations and former U.S. NSA of U.S. John Robert Bolton. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. You worked very closely with President Trump. How do you view his second term, and especially the first 100 days?
Well, I think it's going to be very active. He's laid out a significant agenda. A lot of it has to do with domestic American economic issues and things that have always been a priority for Trump, like removing illegal immigrants, which he pledges to do as soon as he's inaugurated. But I think that the second Trump term will be much like the first term in the sense that it may look orderly at this point and may even look orderly at the beginning, but it will develop in a much more chaotic fashion. He has many different competing objectives. He doesn't pursue a coherent philosophy. Much of his thinking is totally transactional and viewed through the prism of the benefits he gets from it politically. So it will be a wild ride in the second Trump term, much like it was in the first term, except this time the world's in a more dangerous place politically and economically, and therefore a lot of the things that Trump has been talking about could have very serious implications.
Things have changed quite a bit in between his first and the second term. We have the revolution known as artificial intelligence. We have wars in two big places right now, Middle East and then Ukraine. China has become very stronger in terms of electric vehicles and in terms of AI, in terms of making supply lines. Do you see a change in President Trump's approach vis-a-vis his first term?
Not really. I think he primarily looks at issues in a very limited perspective. He doesn't think strategically. I think he looks for the big deal. So he could be looking for another economic trade deal with China. I think he wants to get the wars in the Middle East and Ukraine off the table. He doesn't want to have to deal with them, which implies he doesn't care very much about what the terms are that upon which the conflicts end. And I think his attention span is very short, so he moves from one subject to another quickly without necessarily seeing things through to a conclusion.
He's made commitment about ending Ukraine war. How do you see that happening?
Well, during the campaign, he said that he would get Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine and Vladimir Putin of Russia together in a room, and he would have it solved in 24 hours. Well, that was never going to happen. And in fact, since the election, Trump has admitted it won't happen in 24 hours. But we've yet to hear from Trump anything substantive about what he thinks the end result would look like. Various of his advisors have made plans. His vice presidential nominee, J.D. Vance, had a plan, which are probably close to Trump's thinking, but he himself hasn't really said. As I mentioned, he really wants this off his desk. He doesn't want to be responsible for it. He thinks that it's Biden's war. Trump said during the campaign, if he had been president, Putin never would have invaded. Now, there's no way to prove that or disprove that, but that's typical Trump bluster. The issue is, can he find a solution that the parties will deem as acceptable? And as I say, until he gives us some better indication, we don't know. What we do know is this war's getting ready to go into its third full year, and the parties have both lost a lot of men killed and wounded. It's been extraordinarily costly in terms of the effects on their economies. So this is not something that either the aggressors, the Russians, nor the defenders, the Ukrainians, are going to give up easily, I think.
How dangerous are the threats from Russia, especially after President Putin has altered the nuclear doctrine?
Well, I think most of what Putin has threatened, certainly on the nuclear side, has been bluff. We've had over the past nearly 3 years testimony in open congressional session by representatives of the U.S. intelligence community who have said several times that they have never detected steps by Russian nuclear forces to actually deploy. I think Putin's threats to expand into a wider war have also been hollow. I think Russia's conventional military capability has been severely damaged by this war in Ukraine. They've doubled the territory they hold, but it's been a very expensive war for Russia in human terms and in economic terms.
Ambassador Bolton, do you see any change in Israel's war campaign against Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthi?
Well, I don't think so, because I think it's going very well for Israel. You know, if you don't want to live under terrorist threat, the way to do that is to destroy the terrorists, and Israel is pretty close to accomplishing that objective with Hamas's military capability. They've done severe damage to Hezbollah, not as far along as they are with Hamas, but still a lot of damage. And now the Israelis have turned to the Houthis in Yemen, which frankly the United States and Britain and other countries, depending on free trade and open seas, should have done long ago, because the Houthis have been blocking up the critical Red Sea, Suez Canal maritime passage. And the fall of the Assad regime in Syria just a few weeks ago, which I don't think anyone foresaw, certainly not Bashar al-Assad, has been another very significant development in the Middle East, very harmful to Iran and its ring of fire strategy, which included Syria as well as the various terrorist proxies. So I think Iran is in a very vulnerable position now. We'll see what happens after the 20th of January when Trump is inaugurated, whether perhaps now the Israelis see the opportunity to strike directly at Iran's nuclear weapons program.
Considering how vulnerable Iran is, do you see President Trump going for a regime change there, or will he negotiate with Iran?
Well, he has said yet again he will not seek regime change, but he will reimpose what we called, when I was at the White House, the maximum pressure campaign. My own personal view is that the regime in Iran is as weak as it's ever been, certainly since the revolution in 1979. I think the population is broadly dissatisfied. And we have press reports in the region and in global press that finger pointing and recriminations have begun at the very top levels of the regime on the question of who lost Syria, who lost Assad. So I think even authoritarian governments like the Ayatollahs, they look strong on the outside, but they can be weak inside. And it may be if Israel struck the nuclear program that that may itself might be enough for the regime to fracture at the top and ultimately fall. But it won't be because that's Trump's policy, unfortunately.
And how volatile is Middle East, considering the fact that Assad is already out of Syria and Turkey is playing a very dominant role?
Yeah, look, I think it's a unmitigated plus that Assad is gone, but now we have to deal with the risk of a terrorist state being formed in Syria, a duplicate of Afghanistan. That's obviously not in America's interest or the world as a whole. We'll have to see whether the HTS group that captured Damascus a few weeks ago is sincere when they're saying they're renouncing terrorism. I'm skeptical myself. And as you rightly say, they would not be in Damascus were it not for the support from Turkey, which has long had historical claims against northern Syria going back to the breakup of the Ottoman Empire after World War I. And I'm very worried about Turkey's ambitions against the Kurds and other aspects of its Middle Eastern policy. So nobody should assume that that Syria is not going to be a problem going forward. It's very complicated. You could have fighting between different terrorist groups with ISIS and Al Qaeda, HTS, with the Turks, with the Kurds, with other Syrian opposition forces who are not terrorists. There are 2,000 Americans in northeast Syria with the Kurds and the Syrian Defense Forces. So it's a very dangerous period right at the moment.
After President Trump takes charge, do you see any change in relations with China?
You know, it's an important question. Trump has been very negative on China during the campaign because he believes correctly that the coronavirus came from China, and its economic effect in the United States probably cost Trump the 2020 election. But my view has been for some time that if Xi Jinping just calls Trump up and says, Donald, I'm so glad you're president again. A lot of problems have developed since you were in office. We can solve them. Let's get together. That Trump would be on the plane to Beijing very soon thereafter. The lure of being able to make a big deal for Trump is something he finds very hard to resist. And I think Xi Jinping knows exactly how to play him. But
Uh,
it depends. A lot of other things could come up.
I was going through your book, and in one of the pages, I guess you've mentioned that in an attempt to win the re-election in agricultural states in the 2020 election, he pleaded with Xi to ensure he win. Trump stressed the importance of farmers and increased China's purchase of soybean, Chinese purchase of soybean and wheat in the electoral outcome. It's very transactional. Do you see this behavior? Do you see this attitude again?
I see exactly the same behavior. This is Trump's basic character. It's not something that just happened because it was China or Xi Jinping. That's how he is with respect essentially to everything. So it's not a philosophically based approach. It's not strategic. It doesn't follow what we all consider to be policy development. It's ad hoc, episodic, and very much transactional and looking at how it benefits Donald Trump.
And how do you view the relations between India and America during the second term of President Trump?
Look, I think the relationship between India and the United States is probably the most important question of the 21st century, and particularly how we act in dealing with China. I think in the first term, Prime Minister Modi and Trump developed a good personal relationship, but there were a lot of frictions because of trade. That's what Trump obsesses over. I think this is going to be very important to watch to see when Modi and Trump meet again for the first time as Trump assumes the presidency again. I hope it will be soon, and I hope that they talk about something other than trade disputes. I hope they talk about the big strategic picture, how to deal with the China-Russia axis that's forming and has been in formation for the past year or two, and what our respective approaches will be.
One big talking point in America and all over the world is the major reforms in H1B visa system, which Elon Musk has talked about. How do you view this during the second term of President Trump?
Well, Trump has made illegal immigration a major campaign theme since he first entered presidential politics 10 years ago now. And one of his top priorities on Inauguration Day will be the beginning of transporting the illegal aliens outside of U.S. borders. But on this H1B visa question, he recently has come out essentially in support of that visa program. He has used it himself in his own business. I think from the U.S. point of view, we need more immigration, more legal immigration. That has been the history, the hidden story of America's great success over the years. How Trump recognizes that need with his base's opposition to immigration is going to be a critical question on whether he retains his own supporters' legitimacy through the rest of his term.
Ambassador Bolton, one last question. You've worked with Ronald Reagan, you've worked with President Bush, and you've worked with President Trump. In the second term of President Trump, how do you view the future of America and the world?
Well, I think it's an open question at this point. I think Trump's impulses are isolationist. He's negative on NATO. He's negative about Ukraine. I hope that doesn't turn out to be his policy because it could result in very grave international crises. He's got conflicting advisors. He's named again a team that would, I think, give him different advice on different questions. I think the security of the United States and our prosperity depend on being outward looking and engaged and pursuing a strong foreign policy. I'm not sure that's where Trump is, but as with most things with Trump, you don't know until it becomes public.
Ambassador Bolton, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.